So without further ado, I'd like to kick off our first session, focused on the study on federal information technology transformation, or as we're calling it, SOFIT squared. That's right, to make it official, we had to come up with a witty acronym to make it fit in with the government parlance. Like I said earlier, this study is a result of a wide-ranging survey where we interviewed 120 federal IT executives, over 30 agencies, on a massive effort over this past year. The early findings that have been done with George Washington University have been quite stunning so far. So let me introduce some of the people so you can learn more about it. So if I could invite to the stage first, Shuba Dasgupta, George Washington University Associate Professor of Information Systems and Technology Management. Brian Ensor, George Washington University Assistant Vice President for Strategic Planning and Initiatives. And then as well, Andrew Underhill, GovernmentCIO's Chief Technology Officer. We'll get this kicked off, all right? Thank you very much. All right. Well, thanks again for everyone for joining us and talking a little bit about this research report that was really, quite frankly, a major inspiration, like I said, for launching the event and giving everyone a reason to come out and enjoy a great breakfast and learn as well. So to kick things off, could we just start with you guys giving a quick introduction for each other? So could we start with you, Shuba?
My name is Shuba Dasgupta. I'm an associate professor of information systems in the business school, the School of Business, and I'm glad to be here.
My name is Andrew Underhill, CTIO at GovernmentCIO. I've been in government IT for 20-odd years, trying to engage the community and help them understand what the future looks like.
And Brian Ensor, AVP for Planning and Strategic Initiatives at GW. So my role at GW, we have Planning and Strategy Office, shared infrastructure, and then our local and regional research infrastructure.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you guys. To start, Andrew, could you talk a little bit about some of the motivations and the reason that we really wanted to launch with a research survey and study like this?
Sure. So, our forums and other activities around the company are all focused on information sharing and knowledge gathering. So one of the things we've been really successful in doing is bringing those communities together to share information. But it's really difficult to capture what the current environment looks like. It's even harder to look into the future and see what the future environment looks like. So we thought that one of the best ways to achieve a common baseline for both of those is to engage all of industry, or as much of the industry as we could. So that's why we decided to go big bang and interview over 100 leaders in the government IT ecosystem. So.
Okay, wonderful. Shuba, can you talk a little bit about some of the early, taking some of the surveys that we did? And I think one of the things to really point out is the fact that we did personal surveys. We did one-on-one interviews with those 120 federal IT executives. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to give that opportunity for those folks to really share stories, share personal anecdotes about some of the challenges and opportunities that they're facing, or see in those next 10 years. So now that we've taken a lot of that information from those interviews, we're working with Shuba's team here over at George Washington University and some of their graduate students to do some of that analysis. So Shuba, could you talk a little bit about what some of that early analysis was? And I think we have a couple slides as well to show some of the word clouds that go along with that. Go ahead.
First, I'd like to acknowledge and thank GovernmentCIO for this collaborative effort and in researching the future of IT transformation in the government. We'd like to thank Brian Moran, Matt Van Putten, Gina Gallagher, and from my team, Professor Yijin Liu, Brianna Tucci, Humphrey Magino, and Tyler Hollis. So they might be in the audience today. I'm just the spokesperson for that for my team. So I'm just presenting what my team can put together. There were 120 data points that we had, interviews as well as survey data collected from about 30 agencies by GovernmentCIO. We were tasked with analyzing that research data. So most of the interviews, about 67 of them, were basically interviews with unstructured data And our team put together a text-based analysis of that data. So it was primarily a text analysis of the data that was conducted. So the process that was followed was, and I'll try to be brief about the methodology that we used, was our students, Brianna and her team, along with the guidance from Asian, put together, coded the entire transcript. So basically the audio files of the interviews were first transcribed at GovernmentCIO, and then our students coded each of these interviews in using some technology codes, some non-technology codes, and also using some priorities that they could see in it. And then this was analyzed using text mining. And when this was analyzed, we came up with some clear ideas about what these government CIOs are looking at. What are their challenges, what are their priorities, and what are their concerns. There are a couple of word clouds that are, yeah.
Yeah, can we have the slides for the word clouds brought up?
So in the word clouds, what stands out is that the first one on the general topics are the most popular ones, and I can talk about those. And one of them is, what stands out is data. And it seems that data is one of the most important things that people or individuals or the federal IT is concerned about. Now, we do not have some details. We do not have details of what does data mean, and that will come up with our additional analysis that we plan to conduct over the next few months before the final report is released. There were two other priorities that showed up in the word cloud as well, and those were.
Sure, we got them.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So those were the priorities that showed up. In terms of what are considered to be the priorities, are again data and the cloud. Those were the ones that stood out, and those are understandable because those are the focus of many different companies and in the IT workforce. But we want to get a better insight into these two things. I do not want to minimize the importance of the other things that stood out, which include technology, people, and those were also very important in all other aspects of this research. So the preliminary findings show that these are going to be very important in our results. And now, what do we do need to get a little more depth in terms of our analysis. I would like to conclude by saying that in terms of the conclusions so far, the preliminary conclusions that we have reached include aspects such as the cultural adaptation. Those were terms that were used by our respondents about people and how they get adapted to technology as well as to their agencies. Mm-hmm. And those are some of the things that stood out. Communication skills, people skills, retention, all these aspects stood out in our preliminary results.
Okay. Mm-hmm. To get you involved, Brian, a little bit, we talked yesterday a bit about some of the findings and talked a little bit about some of these word clouds as well. What stood out to you, working here at George Washington University, and making a lot of investments right now in big data as well as investments in federal technology? Shuba mentioned the fact that it's not all about just the ones and zeros and the tech necessarily. What are some of the things that stood out to you, Brian, as you're taking a look at some of these early findings?
Well, first, when we were going through the word clouds, I could pick any of the words and tell my own story around those. Obviously, the research is going to dig deeper into that. But when you look at some of the key ones that came out that were around people and knowledge and how data plays into all of those aspects. But one of the other words that's up on the one right now was thing that caught my attention. And the proliferation of things that are generating, consuming, moving, processing data. And that is accelerating all around us. So when we look at preparing students, engaging them in applied aspects of the type of work they're going to be asked to do when they come out of university, it looks different 3 years from now as it is 6 years from now. So how do you get ahead of some of that? How do you start to take some of these efforts to analyze and come up with findings that help you then look back into your programs and say, how do we structure our programs to ensure that our students are coming out and being prepared for the workforce? How do we partner in the right ways, both in the corporate sense and in the public sense? Some of our early relationships in DC with our research infrastructure has targeted things around sensing networks and environmental sensing networks. And so Pennsylvania Avenue 2040 project is one of those examples where you work with the commercial partners that build some of the IoT technologies. You work with your local government partners who are dealing with acceleration of urbanization and the needs of the constituents in those areas. And you work back to say, well, how do we put structures out there, build an environment that allows research to happen, education to happen, and then really advance the science in these environments. You start to generate and have to manage massive amounts of data across all these systems, but you also touch a large number of disciplines. It isn't just the technology element. It isn't just the federal administration or the local government administration challenges. You're dealing with legal, you're dealing with policy, you're dealing with public health. And so you can see how partnerships between higher education, corporate partners, and cities start to build an opportunity to say, well, we can build programs that help prepare students to work in those type of environments, work with that type of data, help analyze, generate new knowledge. And so when I look at the data, the people, the knowledge, and things, those kind of spoke to me. I'm excited to see what comes out of the report because I want to learn more myself.
Can I just add to that? I was really glad to see people up there.
People.
Because people is often, I'm CTO. Do I care about people? I do care about people, not just technology. And because if you don't engage the people, your technology is not necessarily going to be a successful technology, right? And I think this is really interesting because the university system here can help bridge the people and IT problem.
I think people, just to continue on that, people also stood out in our analysis. So some of the conclusions, the preliminary conclusions, are all about people. It's about the skills. And what was surprising is in one of the word clouds that we came up with, there's all preliminary ones, we just had a few displayed here, but the word cloud about skills, in general, when we talk about people, the one that stands out, it's much larger than anything else, is communication. It's not even technology. It's not the technical expertise of people, of IT, or IT professionals. It's about communication. So it is those are the soft skills that are also as important to CIOs or CXOs.
Right.
And for people.
Yeah. And I think if you look at some of the design thinking movements, user experience movements that are in place today, it's linked to fixing that people problem as well. It's kind of, they're looking at an iceberg, right? The people are using the tip of the iceberg.
That's
complexities below.
Okay. So one of the things that stood out too, so you mentioned people, you mentioned things, or skills, I should say. And one of the topics that comes up a lot is workforce. And we hear a lot about, from a government perspective, of how they need to attract more people. I think, Brian and Shuba, you sit at a unique position. What are some good ways that, some of your talented graduate students especially, that you're working with, how do you get them involved to work with some of these government agencies and tackle some of the challenges that they're going to face?
I think that's a very important question. That's one of the ways we can involve. One of the ways to do this is to involve students very early in their education, and especially undergraduate students. They're looking for internships. They're looking for experience. They want to be connected to industry, both at the federal level as well as other public sector as well as private institutions. And being in Washington, they want to take advantage of those connections. And I think it's a resource that is underutilized. Especially, we have a very strong undergraduate as well as graduate workforce, means a set of students who could then contribute to the workforce, maybe through internships or even part-time work. And during the summers, many do not leave Washington, D.C. to go home. They go home for, at this time, after exams and for Mother's Day, and then they come back. And then they come back and they spend the entire summer here doing internships. So that is a resource. Universities would love to work with organizations to find ways in which to involve our students in these kinds of things. For the graduate students, again, internships very early on, they can work in the summer. That's definitely an advantage. There might be some restrictions in terms of we have a larger international population of graduate students, and that's true across most quantitative fields in universities. So that may have some restrictions, but other than that, setting up these systems in which students can contribute, and I think it's a mutually win-win situation.
Great. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and engaging the students early is a critical part of helping to build a pipeline for working with students to develop what they need by the time they come out of university, that they're adding value immediately. Not that they come out of university, then they have to go through another program before they add value to the organization. And so, there are some examples in the commercial space with companies working with universities to build in internships of every summer of every year for the students. So by the time they're graduating, they've gotten the experience with the company, they've tailored their education within the university environment to ensure that they're getting the right kind of applied skills that they need coming out the door. And making sure those opportunities are there for them. I mean, that's a real partnership. The other thing is how we adapt the programs. And Shuba, we were talking earlier about the pace at which universities can change, and how quickly we can convert a program or stand up a new program or evolve to meet some of these challenges, because the pace is rapid. And how do you look at what makes the whole student coming out and making them marketable? We get measured on where students go. How successful are they in their first endeavor after leaving the university? What's their first destination? And so what are the T skills? What are they really studying deep? And then how do you give them complementary set of broad skills that they need to be effective when communication becomes a critical word that's up there? So you think about somebody that might be in law and focused on developing that career. Well, there are aspects that they need to understand around technology. I mean, you go to a number of consulting firms today, and they've got units that are focused on the technology components or the data components. You go into the accounting field, and same thing, having to deal with the data and the technology and new technologies that are becoming disruptive. And so how do you find students that are deep in a particular area and then expose them to others? How do you have somebody in the business school getting exposure to things that are happening in the engineering school, and the right set of skills that they are truly complementary, and ensuring that you have somebody that's wholly prepared for the career that's coming out. That requires partnerships. That requires engagements with both those that are in the federal space creating job opportunities, those in the commercial space creating job opportunities, in working with universities to say, what does a program look like that really helps us get the students to the best outcomes? And I think that is a lifetime engagement, and something that universities are actively working with many partners on trying to build out, and GW in particular, looking at those cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary type of studies that help complement what might be a core interest of a student.
Okay. We talked a little bit about what we did see, that came up throughout most of those interviews. One thing that stood out, though, that to the four of us was the fact that artificial intelligence or AI did not come up often. Is there anything that stood out to you? Does that surprise you at all, Andrew, in terms of?
Does it surprise me?
Yeah.
Yes.
With so many people
due to all
talking
of
about it seems like?
Right. And a lot of it is, it's in that if you look at the hype life cycle, right? People are talking about it a lot.
Yeah.
There's not so much applied intelligence, if we're going to change the acronym there.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised that we're not talking about it in this forum, because this forum's based on evidence in the market, and that talk hasn't turned into applied applications very much in the marketplace. You know, if you look at medicine and radiology, they have some great artificial intelligence working there, looking at calcifications in images and whatnot. But in terms of applying it to the broader industry, we're in the very early stages of that life cycle.
Okay.
I do want to say, though, that I saw, guests, we need to work out how to get guests work out of doing business, I guess.
Guess? Yeah. Taking the guesswork out of
that's true too.
business. Yeah, I mean, and that is one of the things that we've tried to do with this survey is to take some of that guesswork, provide some of that research and give people the information to move forward with it.
Yeah, and to the communication point, linking it to your point on education, we have a services business as well, and what I'm hearing from my customers is that they would love to engage earlier and more often with the communities and other education environments. And I think it's partly a communication problem, and maybe a time problem as well. Time was up there.
Yeah.
They don't have the time to do it, and the communication channels are unknown, so I think there's a great opportunity there to help fix that problem.
I would also like to add, I think the phrase that was used by my colleague Dr. Liu was that we haven't seen the penetration in terms of AI in the federal government yet, so that it didn't show up in our interviews yet. But there was some talk. There were some CIOs did mention in the transcripts we got that they are looking into machine learning, AI options. But it's very early, like you mentioned.
Right. And people are using it, across the government space, but they're prototypes.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily production environments, and where they are, they're very limited in scope. You've got the chatbots in help desk systems.
Yeah. And Brian, you mentioned robotic process automation is something that the GWU is looking at and doing more investments in. That was something that came up occasionally as well, and that's a big initiative for some of the agencies, for some of the folks in the audience right now. Is there anything that you want to expound upon at that?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of these areas that are being explored, right? And what does an AI worker look like?
Yeah.
And how does that manifest in leveraging things like robotic process automation as an evolution to business process automation, and thinking about those activities that are being done that consume a lot of people time as there's a proliferation of data, as there's a proliferation of things creating that data, new knowledge that we're trying to generate and leverage for decision support. There's just a time and capacity thing. And so when you look at these type of technologies in that sense and say, well, how do these things start to help me manage what's in my space around data? How do I leverage the assets? It was in the video in the beginning where it's like, well, we got what we needed out of this, but what else could somebody get out of this? And these are very time-intensive things. These are very maybe critical findings that can come from these data sets that might go undiscovered or unexplored. And with the evolution of research in AI and quantum computing and looking at how we introduce RPA into systems, that's an area of exploration. But finding those applied areas that help us to explore it with some outcome that's of interest. We talked earlier off stage around the word motivation. And for me, success comes from aligning motivations. So if I have a need in the marketplace with the agencies, I said, this is a real citizen challenge I'm trying to solve. This is a real government challenge I'm trying to solve. And do I have somebody that has interest in helping me to solve that problem because they're aligned with their motivation to solve this? Maybe there's an exploration of a researcher that's looking at RPA that says, I really want to find a use case for this. And a lot of times we might evolve a research project or do an academic program or something around something without that real use case leading it. So by finding that people first experience scenario, aligning the motivations, you can start to line up what you're researching with some outcome. So I think what we're trying to do with some of our research platforms in the city government in really smart cities, which is another buzzword coming up, looking at impact for the citizen through smart cities. How do you build a platform that allows you to research some of this? How do you partner with some commercial partners that help you build out an environment that then leverages these use cases that are provided by the agencies, by the citizens, and say we can really tackle these challenges? And now let's reach back into the assets we have with our higher education institutions across the US and really apply the motivation of a researcher, which when we look at what might be the broad spectrum of your challenges, the researcher is focused on a very precise point of interest that may or may not align with what you're trying to do. And so it's a very hard thing to match up. Try and get 3 agencies to agree on a priority. Inside the university, getting 3 researchers to say this is a priority to work on. Similar kind of challenges.
And you're making it personal as well. You're saying it's the user that should be driving the use cases, not the agency, right? To a certain extent.
And that's a real need for higher education and preparing our students, because then there's real impact to what they're doing, real value, immediate value out of the door. And so I think
of course, something we always forget about is Google Maps, right?
Yeah.
Great application of AI today that everybody uses. So.
Yeah.
But in terms of the work, and taking that a step further, in terms of the workforce question that we talked about, is that I would encourage people, institutions, organizations, agencies, do not hesitate to come to the university and tell us, this is the gap we see, or these are the gaps we see in our workforce development and things like that, because we can, sometimes it's not just our preparing undergraduates and graduate students, is that it's knowing and preparing them right. Right? We do not, sometimes we can keep doing what we do well, but we also need to know what our outside customers are telling us. Okay. We don't use the word customers in the university, though. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we only have about a minute left, but to close real quick, the theme of today is really looking forward, looking into that next decade. From some of the early findings that you guys have, what is the biggest topic that you saw that is going to have an impact on government agencies and how they're formed into the next 10 years, in 2029? We'll start with you, Brian.
Okay, the easy one at the end, yeah? While the biggest word is data, it is the things that help us to manage the deluge of data, be able to create insights, create knowledge from that, and be able to get it to be actionable. I think that is a critical problem that we have today and is exponentially growing. And it's going to be, the challenge will be, how do we partner best? Who are your most critical partners that are going to help you get intelligent about each of those emerging areas that are going to help you to then solve that data challenge that you're going to have, right? So for me, I think partnership development and establishing a very deep partnership across higher ed, commercial partners, federal partners, is going to be the only way we're going to start to chip away at these.
Andrew?
To me, it's all down to understanding, right? So as that design thinking, early on engagement with the user community is going to drive change a lot faster than us bringing tools around and then looking for a use for the tool that we've just invented, right? So, it's the focus on the user driving need. There's a lot of examples around of people forgetting that. Even today, people will redevelop mobile apps and make them very simple to use. Then they forget about some simple feature that should be in that simple interface that's very useful for 90% of their users, right? To give you an example of that, I was at the airport using one big hotel app. I used to be able to click on one button to call the shuttle. Now the app doesn't know where I am in the country, so I've got to go to Google and do a search for the number. Yeah, so they've made it very simple and easy to use. It just doesn't do what I need it to do anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. How about you, Shuba?
I think these have been mentioned before. Brian mentioned it. I think data, cloud, and people. I think those are the ones that are going to drive the next few years.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for giving us kind of an early look. And I'll remind you again, the final report will come out in July, and everybody in this audience will receive a copy of the report. Okay? Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.